Hello everyone. Before getting into the video, I want to quickly tell you guys, I really appreciate the support on my last video, as well as on my channel itself. It's all amazing and really surprising. Thank you very much. Now that you've read the title of the video, I want to explain what it means. This video is essentially an analysis and commentary on the short video clips that were shown during BFB16, where we saw all of the TPOT failed debuters, among them Winner and Price Tag. It's a critique for the most part, as I think it could have been handled very differently for the better. Now with that explanation out of the way, let's get into the video.
But what will the voters vote on? Well, it turns out that one recommended character will join the game.
What you are seeing in the background are the original debut videos of the BFB cast. They've got a short phrase, or none at all, and a brief little gimmick to showcase. Now here's the thing. These were released on Season 1, which ran from 2010 to 2012, with no budget, just two brothers with a passion project, which as expected, would result in episodes which are quite short, with most not reaching 10 minutes, and so with the simplicity of the original BFDI, this works perfectly. Much simpler stories, shorter episodes, less complex characters. I'm not critiquing that, it makes sense, nothing wrong with the execution of the debut video's idea during that time. Now keep in mind that keyword, time, because moving fast forward to 2021, things are very different. Jack and Jellify are a small team, they've got a good budget, the animation quality has increased drastically and so has the length of each episode, and don't get me wrong, BFDI is still a silly show. Until it is no longer the goal. And by that I'm referring to the BFB split. Post-split was continuing the silly approach, while TPOT was described as a more story-focused season. Now that sounds all great, and surprise to everyone, we got a new debuters poll, so let's meet them. Or not, because take a look. Just now, you've taken a look at all of the videos, now what motivates you to vote for one and not the other? Maybe the object itself? Because this video's really put the object in object show, as we're just voting based on looks, for the most part. I'll get to the elephant in the room eventually. And this right here, is pretty awful in my mind, as if you really think about it. What are you voting for? If you chose to vote for example, avocado, what are you voting for really? The answer is simple, you are voting for a mystery box, because you have no idea how this character really is, no personality, no voice lines, just a gimmick. I guess its mouth being different is kinda cool, like Donut. And talking about Donut, let's think of him for a second for this example. When you think of Donut, when you want to judge his character, what do you think of? Option 1. His unique fun gimmick, that being his unique mouth. Option 2. The actions the character has done throughout its entire screen time on the show. If you ask me, when I want to rate a character, I think of their actions, their personality, their friendships and rivalries. A good way to put it, is that when I think of these contestants, I think of what makes them a character, not an object. Yet what this system does, is to make you vote for your favorite object, not your favorite character, and I personally really dislike that. The nail in the coffin is really the fact that it was for TPOT, the story-focused season, but if it wasn't, it would have still been pretty unacceptable in my mind, because what matters, is that it happened in modern BFDI times, not in what season. You are voting for a mystery box, for nothing essentially.
Over there! Right, hang on, Winner and Taggy, can you make some room for Nonexisty?
Before I start the yep in this chapter, I want to briefly clarify something. I do not hate Winner, I do not hate Price Tag. With that being said, Winner, Nonexisty and Price Tag were obviously going to be the top 3, and in a poll where you are supposed to be voting for your favorite character out of many new ones, this should not be the case at all. It's a giant flaw in my eyes, that absolutely ruined this poll, and the chances of any of the failed debuters to actually debut. Here's why. First of all, Winner. So in the previous chapter my whole point was that you are voting for a mystery box, essentially nothing. But this doesn't apply to Winner, and that's why Winner won, by such a massive lead. Because when you vote for Winner in the original poll, you were voting to expand the lore of an already existing character, that right there makes Winner have a guarantee first place in votes, because it's the only character that gives you some sort of incentive to vote for them, and if you were not aware, the lore I'm referring to is the lore of Loser. Secondly, Nonexisty, he was always guaranteed to be the second most voted contestant. Once again bringing back the points of the previous chapter, voting for nothing is not interesting, and yes I know it's ironic I'm discussing Nonexisty here. The point is though, that Nonexisty is voting for something unknown just like the rest of the contestants, but with one major difference. It's something that has been established in the BFDI universe for a really long time, so while it is true we know just as little about Nonexisty as the rest of the failed debuters, we have known of Nonexisty's existence for far longer, and with that you get the second most votes. A fatal flaw once again. Why would you vote for something new, when there's something old that finally gets the opportunity to be explored? Finally, price tag. There's very little to be said here, and that's because price tag's case is very different from the previous two, but also because I don't want to repeat my points from the previous chapter. But essentially, I discussed how you're voting for a mystery box, and voting for a mystery box is not an incentive, you're voting for nothing. So what does that leave? Well, I also discussed that it leaves the voting for the object, that being the appearance, and you want to know who has the most unique appearance out of all the potential debuters in that poll? It's price tag. Obviously it's price tag. All of the TPOT cast have the same assets, some are a bit more unique, like Donut with his unique mouth asset. Price tag is the first character who has a completely unique face, as well as the way it is animated, not only mouth, but eyes too, and don't mention Evil Leafy please, you get what I'm trying to say here. And so, guess who got the third most votes? It was price tag. I already discussed the donut example, so I won't repeat it here. So before moving on to the next chapter, here's a conclusion for the discussion in this chapter, and that being a major flaw I want to point out, the voting for the failed debuter should have been fair for all parties. But by removing any semblance of character traits to all of the failed debuters, you get a voting with predictable results, where two of the characters with the most votes are ones already established to some capacity, so by default they're more interesting, and the third one with the most votes, simply the one who has the most interesting appearance. Very flawed if you ask me. Moving fast forward in time, we go to a time where we now know a decent amount about some of the failed debuters, finally becoming characters over objects. Keep in mind that keyword, some, because many have not gotten the time to show their personality yet, and 4 have not had a single speaking line. What I mean with the conch shell paradox is, and just to be clear I don't know if there's a paradox that already exists with this concept. When a character is presented as something that they're not, and when that character eventually gets explored, their initial appearance no longer matches with what the character really is like. And in my opinion, this is what happens when a poll is filled with characters, with no other purpose but to fill the poll with more options. I don't mean to sound too harsh here, but I've got to discuss this. It's way too much of an elephant in the room. Conch shell is the biggest culprit here, and so I named the paradox after him. Now just to clarify, I do not dislike Conch shell, in fact, I quite like him. Anyways though I'm going to get the point, so editor me will put Conch shell's debut video in the background in a second, take a look. If you were a conch shell voter, what did you imagine him as? His expression is very serious, he doesn't seem happy at all, maybe grumpy, maybe more of an emo. Me personally, though I never voted in the TPOT debut, I would have thought he'd be, kinda like what Nickel was before post-hiatus BFDIA, that being a pessimist, though much more than Nickel was in BFDIA to be honest. However that's not the point. The point is that the original presentation of Conch shell gave the impression to most people at least, that he'd be something along the lines of the examples I gave. So what did we get?
None taken. They're all off.
Huh? Well that's one silly goober if I've ever seen one, and I like Conch shell, he's goofy and dumb, however there is no semblance of what he was presented as originally at all, and I've got a bit of a problem with that, as it is essentially false advertisement, and it's the pinnacle of my main argument throughout the whole video, that you are voting for nothing, but worst of all, you may vote for something, but receive something entirely different, which should not be the case at all, yet it is. Another example to a lesser degree of this, is 9ball, who is seen writing "I don't have a favorite letter," alluding to 8ball of course, but most importantly, and this is more subjective to be honest, I'd guess this is referring to some sort of jokester sarcastic character, cause what else are you supposed to make of that quote you know, and well from the little screen time 9ball has gotten, she's not sarcastic at all. Bonus points for having her voting screen have her with a grumpy mildly annoyed expression, once again like 8ball, even though she's nothing like 8ball personality-wise. So to briefly summarize, here's a list of what needs to change: have the videos be longer, have the videos showcase the character's personality, have the video showcase the character with voice lines, have the voting not be dependent on who has the most interesting design but instead who's the most interesting character, and remove characters who have any sort of already established presence in the show, as that gives them a massive advantage over any of the other options. With that being said, I can't just critique and not give solutions, so here's my proposal as to what I would personally do. I say personally because this idea is not a perfect solution, but very much subjective. However, I like to think it improves upon the current system. First of all, if the videos are going to be longer, they won't be showed during the episode in which the voting is announced, but instead a playlist would pop up, where you can click and see each character's video individually. Anyways, so a video of 45 seconds to 1 minute has the potential to showcase enough, while not being longer than they need to be. So the most important part, what would the videos show? Well, instead of showing a silly gimmick, the videos would be a sort of interview type deal, where let's say the host of the season asks the debuter a set of 2 or 3 questions, and the idea is for the questions to be the same for all of the debuters, so you can see how differently each contestant responds and reacts to a question, and for that matter, have an idea of how any of these characters would react to different sorts of situations. That way you have an idea of what you will get in the future, if you vote for a certain character, and that character ends up winning the vote. Which additionally allows a way to compare and contrast between contestants, due to all of them dealing with the same scenario. So for my final thoughts on the topic, I do have to answer the following question: does this really matter in the grand scheme of things? The answer is no, not at all. It's a mild annoyance I have, and there's a reason no one talks about this, because it's not that big of a deal. It really isn't. However, that doesn't excuse it from being critiqued, and that's what I did here. Hopefully this comes off as constructive criticism, because I don't mean to throw hate, or to have this video to be perceived as just complaining. The second thing I wanted to mention is more of an acknowledgement, that being about the TPOT 12 debut videos with the Exiters. So if you're wondering what I think about them, I think it's an improvement, as if we didn't know anything about the Exiters, we would get a good idea of what they're like. The short dialogue each of them say are very expressive, and tell a lot, either directly or indirectly.
If I rejoin, I just want to make it to the final, well, you can guess the number, I don't really care.
8ball sounds pessimistic, and outright says he doesn't really care. Others like Match don't say anything as directly, but clearly give a fun vibe.
You should vote me to prove how much I've changed. My hair's now rainbow! So now the stakes are like huge!
However, with those praises out of the way, there's an elephant in the room, and that is Pencil's debut video.
Vote me in, yeah, let me join, yeah, so I can join TPOT,
Which is a perfect example of the conch shell paradox. She doesn't seem sad, or traumatized, or anything like that at all. She seems very much happy, and what the voters voted for was not what they got. Now, just to be clear, I'm not complaining. I actually am a big fan of the one storyline, and love what they're doing with Pencil. However, I can't help but point out the obvious, and in this case one could say that when opening this mystery box, we got something better than expected. That doesn't mean it isn't part of the conch shell paradox, clearly a flaw, even if I do like what we got. The final thing I wanted to mention is that, and I don't mean to be a conspiracy theorist here, but the BFB 16 voting was for sure rigged on purpose to have winner win. The BFDI team for sure knew the others stood no chance against winner, and they wanted to make the loser storyline have a resolution. So it took priority over a more fair debut voting, and that's fine in my opinion. The writers wanted a little bit of control, and I find it reasonable. They can tell the story they want to tell, and that story included winner. This is also definitely why they made the debut have 2 winners, so price tag, or whoever won that second place, could join, and the voting wasn't just to get winner in the season, but for the voters to still have some justice, and have somebody actually fully new join the game nonetheless. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you for watching till the end, thank you for the support, and I'll see you in my next video.